Say goodbye, Carolyn.
Goodbye, Carolyn.
She is a gem.
I'm just gonna say it. Portal is one of the best narrative experiences in media. Yeah, maybe there's a possibility that the majority of that is probably just my nostalgia speaking for Portal 1, but I mean it. In my opinion, Portal is one of my all-time favourite stories ever told in any medium. I was debating making a video because I'm still perfecting my craft on YouTube. My last video essay I did was about a band who made a couple of my favourite albums in a particular year, and to make a jump to one of my favourite things to ever exist ever was a tough decision, but I know I had to make this video. However, by far the most interesting facet of Portal, and the part I'm going to be talking about and exploring in depth today, is the fact that most people will not understand the story by just playing the game. There are important clues hidden throughout to give us the answer to the true mystery. Why is Chell important? Why did the wall know the cake is a lie? Well, it has something to do with a family history, and a father, mother, and child. I remember walking into a Forbidden Planet store, and they are this geeky comic book store in the UK, but specifically, I walked into the London Forbidden Planet, and I remember seeing some of my favourite things there. Doctor Who posters, video game figurines, plenty of anime and manga, but specifically what caught my eye was the Portal replica gun. The sight of these things made me extremely emotional, but why? Well, to know that many other people out there share the same passion for something which frankly possessed me in my tween years just makes me extremely happy. That's why I'm making this video, to expose more people to one of my favourite things ever. If at any point you feel like you want to click off and explore this for yourself, please do. If you don't want any spoilers, as this video is probably going to be pretty spoiler heavy, I'd click off now and come back. Both Portal games combined are less time-heavy experiences than a lot of AAA games on the market now, and are incredibly cheap, especially in a Steam sale. But I present to you Portal, uncovering a family mystery. But before anything else, we have to go back to the beginning, before Portal was even in production. We have to go back to a group of students called Nuclear Monkey Software. Going onto their website leads you to a very nostalgic looking HTML page. The most interesting part starts here though, a blog post at April 7th, 2005. The beta is ready. A lot of general bug fixes have been made to the game. The most important change is that the game will now run on value video cards. And speaking of value, did you ever notice that it's only one letter away from being Valve? So the cat is out of the bag now. This is one of the many subtle hints that NMS will be making at Valve tomorrow to show the Nabacular drop. I think it's awesome. But that is probably because I am one of the people who will be visiting Valve. One day, you too will have the chance to visit Valve, but that day is not tomorrow, sucker. How did that meeting go? Well, April 12th, 2005. Life is really strange sometimes. Like, sometimes you make a kick-ass student game project, and then the heads of Valve might see that project, and before you know it, they want to contract your entire team to make that game in the Source engine. Does that ever happen to you? Well, it happened to us, and even though Dave has predicted 8 months ago that this exact thing would happen, we were all left in complete shock. Gabe Newell was impressed by our game, and personally extended our entire team a generous offer. Needless to say, we're ecstatic. What does that mean for the future of Nabacular Drop? We are figuring that out as it goes. As soon as the picture starts coming together, we will give you more news. Until then, enjoy some nice screenshots. But what was Nabacular Drop? It was a project made by a very small group, and involved placing portals to navigate the map. Sound familiar? That's because Gabe wanted them to recreate the game in the Source engine. However, as you can tell by the footage, Nabacular Drop was just not Portal. Sure, it has the Portal mechanic, but that's about it. The charm was completely different. The story was about a princess, and yeah, it has a long way to go before it becomes what we all know. And when I say that, I mean that very literally. See, Portal was still holding on to its darker counterpart, using Half-Life 2 textures to create a Nova Prospekt-esque aesthetic. When listening to the developer commentary on Portal, we hear why they ditched this.
Early versions of Portal featured more detailed, cluttered environments, much like Half-Life 2. We quickly realized that unnecessary objects scattered all over the place distracted players to the point where it actually interfered with the Portal training process. So we simplified the art style to favor clean, focused test chambers. The modular approach we settled on makes it look plausible that the chambers can reform dynamically on these pistons.
And there were many small ideas which had to be changed because the gameplay came first. This is personally why Portal is held up to higher regard than the second by a group of a player base. The gameplay and puzzle for Portal always came first rather than the story, but we'll talk more about that later. Portal had many ways to go in order to become how it is now known. Turrets had to be changed from Half-Life 2's version to its own unique version with dialogue, and GLaDOS wasn't even originally in the game, but we'll also come to GLaDOS in more detail later on. The project marched on, and in an E3 conference, Portal 1 was announced to the world. So, this is the part of the video where I got to describe Portal to you, and to be honest, this is my 5th attempt of doing so in this script. I mean, this game is so goddamn hard to describe. I could use words like masterpiece, but I really want to describe exactly why that is, so I apologise if I missed the mark a little bit, but here we go. Portal 1 is a game where, with a unique quote-unquote gun, you quote-unquote shoot portals onto a surface. Now, these portals aren't entering you to a different dimension or anything similar to that. It essentially portals you to a different part of the map, and with this mechanic, and with a perfect learning curve, which has been playtested to death by Valve, they perfectly mastered the art of teaching the player, and provided a flawless experience, unique only to this game.
It's absolutely critical that players quickly wrap their heads around what a portal is. We noticed early playtesters grasped the concept much more quickly when they caught a glimpse of themselves through a portal. So we deliberately positioned this first portal to ensure that players will invariably see themselves.
Portal is effectively an extended player training exercise. We spend a huge portion of the game introducing a series of gameplay tools, then layering those tools into increasingly difficult puzzles. This layering starts here, where we train the button and box mechanic, before introducing the more complicated concept of portals.
Portal never feels overwhelming to the point of fatigue, but it's always challenging enough to give you a rush of euphoria.
Much of the fun in Portal is based on the joy of the aha moment when you learn something new. The game needs a very specific pacing to ensure these moments. If things are too easy, then you're robbed of that moment since it feels like you didn't accomplish anything. If it's too hard, then players feel stupid instead of smart when they finally realize that one small part of the puzzle that they were missing. Unfortunately, trying to create that delicate balance leads to a lot of shuffling of levels and a lot of revisions and tweaks to existing levels.
There are other mechanics to help push along the chambers, like the idea of gravity speeding up, aka momentum, a laser ball, and a catcher which activates different doors and whatnot, and depressed sad little turrets. But I think what makes most people the most fond of Portal is the story and writing. Without these two elements, I really don't think Portal would stick in people's mind as much as it did, from The Cake is a Lie to GLaDOS' commentary throughout the whole thing. But I will explore this extremely closely in the video, so I don't really want to dwell on this point too hard. The takeaway is that Portal 1 is a game which has been reworked so many times that it's become a perfectly polished game. I think a lot of this is to do with Valve's tendency to never rush a project, and to keep delaying until a project is perfect. And that's exactly how I would describe Portal, perfect. I cannot find a fault in Portal 1, and if you have never played it before, I mean seriously, don't swallow yourself with the experience. Click off this video, buy Portal 1 for dirt cheap on Steam, and just play it. The critical reception of Portal 1 was extremely high. So high that out of the whole orange box, including the Half-Life episodes and the original game, Portal and Team Fortress 2, Portal was often the highest regarded. It was mostly for its obviously unique gameplay, but also for its dark and deadpan humour. The one thing I failed to mention is how funny Portal is. Portal is somehow both incredibly charming but also incredibly dark, and behind all of that is a mystery. There is something not right about waking up in this cozy little room with a sentient AI talking over you. Let's go over the story of Portal for a minute. You are Chell. The origin of Chell is unknown, apart from the fact that you do not speak. Either that or you don't have any written lines. And you have apparently signed up to do some science with a company called Aperture Science. You awake in a chamber with a radio, a bed, a toilet, and a clock ticking down, while a robot is introducing you to the Aperture Science Enrichment Chamber.
Hello, and again, welcome to the Aperture Science Computer-Aided Enrichment Center. We hope your brief detention in the relaxation vault has been a pleasant one. Your specimen has been processed, and we are now ready to begin the test proper.
This AI is what is later referred to as GLaDOS. GLaDOS is who you will be hearing throughout Portal 1. She speaks at pretty much the beginning of every chamber and at the end of every chamber. She'll be watching you with omnipotence, and by that, I mean through the numeral vital testing apparatus on the wall.
To ensure the safe performance of all authorized activities, do not destroy vital testing apparatus.
Anyway, so while you're solving these puzzles with your gun, which can gradually shoot 2 portals at once, GLaDOS becomes more and more deceitful.
The Enrichment Center regrets to inform you that this next test is impossible. Make no attempt to solve it. Fantastic. You remained resolute and resourceful in an atmosphere of extreme pessimism.
But it isn't until we reach Chamber 16, with turrets which are very, very depressed, when the mood starts to change, as we discover an entrance at the end of a piston. Creepy or funny? You decide. And so, essentially, these clues sort of give us the feeling that we aren't going to get a cake happy ending after all. But eventually it rolls around and we are on a bridge where we see the sign for the cake. And then fire. And so, this is when the truth of Portal's clean and polished vibe starts to crumble before your eyes. GLaDOS in a sad attempt tries to lean you back in, but you keep getting closer and closer to the lair. As you solve these puzzles outside of the chamber, there are many quips of GLaDOS saying how big of a mistake you are making. But eventually you arrive. And how do you defeat this omnipotent AI who wants you dead? Incinerate all the cores in her body, of course.
You're kidding me. Did you just up that Aperture Science thing, we don't know what it does, into an Aperture Science Emergency Intelligence Incinerator? That has got to be the dumbest thing that— Whoa. Good news. I figured out what that thing you just incinerated did. It was a morality core they installed after I flooded the Enrichment Center with a deadly neurotoxin to make me stop flooding the Enrichment Center with a deadly neurotoxin. So get comfortable while I warm up the neurotoxin emitters.
This inevitably defeats GLaDOS and you are shot up into the ceiling, where you finally escape the facility.
Don't believe me? Here, I'll put you on.
You're wrong about every single thing you've ever done, including this thing.
You're not smart. You're not a scientist.
You're not a doctor. You're not even a full-time employee. Where did your life go so wrong? Are you trying to escape? Things have changed since I found out. I found out all the information about you.
All is amazing. I mean, that is until you're dragged back by what sounds like a robot into the facility. Ready for Portal 2. Before we talk about Portal 2, however, let's talk about the huge tonal shift in Portal. At the beginning of the game, all seems organised and inconspicuous. I mean, sure, there's a robot talking to you over a speaker, but apart from that, nothing really seems too much out of the ordinary. just a little scientific testing. But the first time we start to get a whiff that something might be seriously wrong, we see decayed walls with writing scribbled on. The whole room looks completely neglected. This, to me, at least, signifies how GLaDOS is only showing the player what she wants to show us. It's a narrative built up, and that's exactly why she remains so powerful. It isn't until the final chamber where we manage to escape her trap, and she starts to lose grip on this power. We are then greeted to more rooms full of decaying walls and steaming pistons. It's nothing like we have seen in early parts of the game. GLaDOS' room is very pristine and clean, however. It's obvious she wants to maintain the illusion that everything is going to plan, and she is still very much in control. I mean, until she isn't anymore. It's no coincidence that as soon as we start incinerating parts of her, the room becomes more and more full of debris. That's her power being removed. Just from small details like this in the world, we can infer that the team is very intentional with its surroundings. But again, we'll touch more on it later. The thing you have to remember about Portal 1 was that it was only a very small game to complement the bigger children like Half-Life and TF2. But now it was getting its very own sequel with its own promotional release, and it's all grown up now. Portal 2 has the pressure of upholding and even exceeding the bar set by the already amazing Portal 1. And how does it do? Well, it depends on the person. Some people enjoy Portal 2 more than the first, and some people think Portal 1 is nowhere near as rich or exciting as Portal 2. But before we go into the reasons why, let's talk about some of the changes. Portal 2 had a whole new fresh coat of paint, and I mean that literally. Remember how Portal 1 started from a student project? Well, the team knew that a lot of the success of the first Portal was due to this fact, so they found another interesting project from the exact same school Nabaki the Drop came from, DigiPen. This project was called Tag, the Power of Paint, and it included essentially the same things you can do in Portal 2. The adhesion gel, also known as the green paint in Tag, allows the player to bounce super high. The propulsion gel, also known as the red paint in Tag, allows the player to speed up and run super fast. And finally, the cleansing gel, also known as the white gel in Tag, allows you to clean any surface with gel. There were some additions and retractions from Tag. An addition was the conversion gel, which allowed the player to repaint surfaces to place portals on, and the retraction was the blue paint in Tag, which allowed you to walk on walls. The reason the team removed this was because the playtesters found it very sickening to walk on walls and place portals at the same time, and if there's one thing we know, Valve takes its playtesters very seriously.
While re-implementing the paint mechanics from our student game Tag the Power of Paint, in the context of Portal 2, the biggest change we made was to exclude the paint gun. In Tag, our paint gun allowed the player to paint the environment freely in an abstract outdoor environment, but in our gameplay experiments, that was very difficult to constrain without contrivance in Portal 2's indoor spaces. It also changed the game's pacing significantly, since being able to run at high speed around a level covering everything in paint is a lot more fast-paced, energetic, and often scattershot than Portal's more cerebral gameplay. Perhaps most importantly, there is a certain elegance in the simplicity of manipulating all the game elements using only the portal gun. Adding a new gun would inherently add complexity and force us to start from square one training the player how to use this new tool instead of focusing on the game's namesake. Instead, we decided to use the established mechanism of the delivery tubes and have players redirect the flow of the paint with their portal guns. This felt like a good compromise.
That is only one small addition, however. There were many new things introduced in Portal 2. Aerial faith plates, which is also inspired from Tag, which shoots you up into the air in a certain direction. Light bridges, which allows platforms to walk on and can be sent through portals. There are lasers, reflection cubes, funnels which allow you to float through midair. I mean, it had a lot of cool new stuff. But how was the puzzles affected? I mean, not only did we now have a huge amount of mechanics to build chambers out of, but there are also new characters, a huge scope, a new story, a co-op mode. I mean, they were definitely different. A common critique of Portal 2 was how there was a lot of non-puzzles and filler, which acted more like a walking simulator, if anything else, as the only puzzle was finding a white small surface you could portal up to. I suppose a good comparison is that Portal was like a small box, but it was incredibly well detailed with every part of it given as much detail as the rest. While Portal 2 is more like a huge box, which adds to the more immersive experience, but with less care being shown on every little tiny detail. Whichever appeals to you is completely up to the player, but it definitely gives a different feel and the differences tend to jump out when you binge both games, like I did in preparation for the video. However, this did not stop the huge amount of praise Portal was given by critics on release, and by that I mean universal acclaim, receiving a 95 out of 100 score on Metacritic. In fact, going back onto the small box big box comparison, Oil Welsh of Eurogamer is quoted as saying, "Portal is perfect, Portal 2 is not. Something better than that." I feel like this is a lesson we can all learn from art in general, when Portal is this great carrier of the message. Just because something is technically perfect and without critique, that does not make the work any more enjoyable than something which has notable flaws but is an amazing experience. When I think of Portal, I always come back to the sequel. I mean, the hours speak for itself. I have 388 hours on Portal 2, and counting up my Steam and Xbox hours, it'll probably be somewhere around 50 hours for Portal 1. However, if you were to ask me which Portal game I thought was the better made, I mean, I'd probably say the first one. I think it's just an interesting discussion to have, but I suppose it's not that relevant for the video. There was also a co-op mode in Portal, and the story actually links into the main single player. However, for this video I'm not really going to be touching on that, but I can make a future video where I'll discuss such. Portal 2 starts where Portal 1 left off, as Chell awakes in a perfect looking room, as an announcer over a loudspeaker gives instructions like jumping up and down and staring at art. As we wake up, we awake to Stephen Merchant, who is playing Wheatley, knocking, imploring us to open up the door immediately.
Ah! Oh God, you look good. Looking good, actually. Are you okay? Are you? Don't answer that. I'm absolutely sure you're fine. There's plenty of time for you to recover. Just take it slow.
Please prepare for emergency evacuation.
Stay calm. Stay calm. Prepare. That's all I'm saying. Prepare. It's all fine. All right. Don't move. I'm gonna get us out of here. Oh, you might want to hang on to something. Word of advice. Up to you.
Wheatley is the new major character in Portal, and he's notably not that bright. After he comically deduces that you must have brain damage,
most test subjects do experience some cognitive deterioration after a few months in suspension. Now, you've been under for quite a lot longer, and it's not out of the question that you might have a very minor case of serious brain damage. But don't be alarmed, all right? Although if you do feel alarmed, try to hold on to that feeling, because that is the proper reaction to being told that you've got brain damage.
He smashes what is revealed to be a hibernation chamber, straight into the wall labelled docking station. You jump into the room you started the first game off in, except now, everything has changed. There's plants and debris everywhere. GLaDOS has been replaced with an announcer, who seems to think that an apocalypse has happened? Yeah, you really had a number on this facility.
Hello, and again, welcome to the Aperture Science Enrichment Center. We are currently experiencing technical difficulties due to circumstances of potentially apocalyptic significance beyond our control. However, thanks to emergency testing protocols, testing can continue.
But soon enough, Wheatley shows back up, and after rendezvousing, he unplugs from his rail and he guides you to the ruins of what you did to GLaDOS. Her decapitated parts are splayed out all over the floor, and after stepping over them, Wheatley describes that human did this years ago.
There she is. What a nasty piece of work she was, honestly. Like a proper maniac. Do you know who ended up taking her down in the end? You're not going to believe this. A human. I know. I wouldn't have believed it either. Apparently this human escaped and nobody's seen him since. Then there was a sort of long chunk of time where absolutely nothing happened. And then there's us escaping now. So that's pretty much the whole story. You're up to speed. Don't touch me.
As you get to a room full of different levers, Wheatley says that he can help you escape to the surface. However, due to his negligence, he ends up pressing pretty much every lever possible to switch on, which awakes GLaDOS. And here you are, facing her again, except this time, she really, really hates you.
Oh, it's you.
You know her?
It's been a long time. How have you been? I've been really busy being dead. You know, after you murdered me.
You did what? Oh no! No! Oh no!
Okay, look, we both said a lot of things that you're going to regret. But I think we can put our differences behind us. For science, you monster. I will say, though, that since you went to all the trouble of waking me up, you must really, really love to test. I love it too. There's just one small thing we need to take care of first.
Oh, and trust me, she will hammer this point into you again and again and again, making fun of the fact that you look fat, you look ugly. But the one thing which we will find very important later on is that she was adopted. Keep this in mind, it becomes important later on. Trust me. However, this doesn't last for too long, because after Wheatley has finished having a quarrel with a bird named Jerry,
Bird!
he comes to the rescue and breaks you out of the chambers. You and Wheatley then work on disabling all the different techniques she used against you last time. You replace the turrets with defects, you disable the neurotoxin, and you get yourself sucked into a transportation tube to confront GLaDOS, once and for all. This part is a crucial part of the plot, so I must beg, for the last time, if you have not played Portal 2, this is major spoiler territory. If this video has appealed to you so far, which I assume it must have if you're this far in, then just stop here and finish the game for yourself, okay? Cool. So, for one reason or another, might be because GLaDOS has only just been waking up, or that Chell defeated her, or that her neurotoxin and turret plans aren't working, she is seen as faulty by an algorithm, and requires a core transfer. Because Wheatley is in the room, it's up to Chell to resolve the stalemate and bring Wheatley into GLaDOS' body. GLaDOS is then soon replaced with Wheatley, and it doesn't quite go to plan.
Wow! Check me out, partner. We did it! I'm in control of the whole facility now. Whoa! Would you look at this? Not too bad, eh? Giant robot, massive. It's not just me, right? I am bloody massive, aren't I? Oh, right, yeah, the escape lift. I'll call it now. There we go. Lift called. Oh, sorry, no, the lift. Yes, sorry, I keep forgetting. This body's amazing, seriously. I can't get over how small you are, but I'm huge. Actually, why do we have to leave right now?
As soon as Wheatley realizes how powerful he is, he decides he wants to keep you for testing. He turns GLaDOS into a freaking potato, and GLaDOS explains Wheatley's origin story.
I know you.
Sorry, what?
The engineers tried everything to make me behave, to slow me down. Once, they even attached an intelligence dampening sphere on me. It clung to my brain like a tumor, generating an endless stream of terrible ideas.
No, not listening, not listening.
It was your voice.
No, you're lying,
Yes,
you're lying.
You're the tumor. You're not just a regular moron. You're designed to be a moron.
I am not a moron!
Yes, you are. You're the moron they built to make me an idiot.
Well, how about now? Now who's a moron? Could a moron punch you into this pit? Ah! Could a moron do that? Uh-oh.
So before we talk about what happens next, I think it's important to talk about power again. The surroundings decayed as GLaDOS clinged onto her power of the situation. But now the theme of power is brought up again, as Wheatley betrays what has become to be his friend for power. This could be a commentary on power on display here, with Wheatley not necessarily being that bad of a person, but instead seduced by the new power he now has in this situation. This is explored later, and I will bring it back up when we get around to Carolyn. This is where the truly interesting part of Portal happens to me, and is my personal favourite part of the game. After falling into the pit, you land into the very bottom of the Aperture facilities, and are introduced into my personal favourite Portal character.
Welcome, gentlemen, to Amateur Science. Astronauts, war heroes, Olympians, you're here because we want the best, and you are it. So, who is ready to make some science?
I am.
Now, you already met one another on the limo ride over, so let me introduce myself. I'm Cave Johnson. I own the place. That eager voice you heard is the lovely Carolyn, my assistant. Rest assured, she has transferred your honorarium to the charitable organization of your choice. Isn't that right, Carolyn?
Yes, sir, Mr. Johnson.
She's the backbone of this facility. Pretty as a postcard, too. Sorry, fellas. She's married. To science.
He is an egomaniac who really doesn't think much about the consequences of his actions, instead doing whatever is possible to make new discoveries in science. Another character who we are introduced to ends up being very important. Her name is Carolyn. It's unclear who Carolyn exactly is to Cave Johnson, or if they're married, but for now I think it's pretty safe to assume that they're science assistants. Either way, this is the part where the gels from TAG start to slowly get introduced in 3 mini acts. The first act showcases the blue gel introduced, as Cave Johnson really starts to show his blatant regard for any safety laws.
Oh, in case you got covered in that repulsion gel, here's some advice the lab boys gave me. Do not get covered in the repulsion gel. We haven't entirely nailed down what element it is yet, but I'll tell you this, it's a lively one, and it does not like the human skeleton.
But I mean, on the bright side, we get a nice little reunion with a potato?
Did you feel that? That idiot doesn't know what he's doing up there. This whole place is going to explode in a few hours if somebody doesn't disconnect him. I can't move, and unless you're planning to saw your own head off and wedge it into my old body, you're going to need me to replace him. We're at an impasse. So what do you say? You carry me up to him and put me back into my body, and I stop us from blowing up and let you go. No tricks. This potato only generates 1.1 volts of electricity. I literally do not have the energy to lie to you. Even if I am lying, what do you have to lose? You're going to die either way. Look, I don't like this any more than you do. In fact, I like it less because I'm the one who got partially eaten by a bird.
So, with GLaDOS going from absolutely hating your fiber to being forced to buddy up, you mount her onto your gun and go on with the day. I mean, that's until something very strange happens.
Did anything happen while I was out?
The testing area is just up ahead. The quicker you get through, the quicker you'll get your $60.
Hold on.
Carolyn, are the compensation vouchers ready?
Yes, sir, Mr. Johnson. Why did I just... Who is that? What the hell is going on here?
It's pretty obvious now that Carolyn and GLaDOS are somehow the same person, and it's quite interesting to hear how this happens. Anyway, nothing too strange happens until we reach the white gel, where we hear some troubling news from Cave Johnson about the effects of making the gel.
Welcome to the Enrichment Center. Since making test participation mandatory for all employees, the quality of our test subjects has risen dramatically. Employee retention, however, has not. As a result, you may have heard we're going to phase out human testing. There's still a few things left to wrap up, though. The bean counters told me we literally could not afford to buy $7 worth of moon rocks, much less 70 million. Bought them anyway, ground them up, mixed them into a gel. And guess what? Ground up moon rocks are pure poison. I am deathly ill. Still, it turns out they're a great portal conductor. So now, we're going to see if jumping in and out of these new portals can somehow leach the lunar poison out of a man's bloodstream. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Let's all stay positive and do some science. That said, I would really appreciate it if you could test as fast as possible. Carolyn, please bring me more pain pills.
This optimism soon turns into bitterness, and at the end of one of the test chambers, we hear some of the most hilariously quotable, but also depressing lines in video game history. It also at the same time reveals a lot about the lore of Aperture. And so let's listen in, and we'll discuss it afterwards.
Alright, I've been thinking. When life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Make life take the lemons back. Get mad! I don't want your damn lemons! What am I supposed to do with these?
Take the lemons.
Demand to see life's manager. Make life rue the day it thought it could give Cave Johnson lemons. Do you know who I am? I'm the man who's gonna burn your house down. with the lemons. I'm gonna get my engineers to invent a combustible lemon that burns your house down.
Burning people. He says what we're all thinking.
The point is, if we can store music on a compact disc, why can't we store a man's intelligence and personality on one? So I have the engineers figuring that out now. Brain mapping, artificial intelligence. We should have been working on it 30 years ago. I will say this, and I'm gonna say it on tape so everybody hears it 100 times a day. If I die before you people can pour me into a computer, I want Carolyn to run this place. Now she'll argue. She'll say she can't. She's modest like that, but you make her. Hell, put her in my computer. I don't care. All right, test's over. You can head on back to your desk.
Goodbye, sir.
Times like this is where Portal's writing really does shine through. Never have I laughed so hard at something which sounds so stupid, and yet become so entranced by the storytelling, just in this little audio clip. I mean, unless it's unclear, Cave Johnson has become mad that his carelessness has finally caught up to him, and he has a realization that he's going to die. The idea is that Cave Johnson will be pushed into a computer, or if not, have Carolyn run the place. If we read between the lines here, we can pretty much deduce what happened. Carolyn's soul was pushed into the computer, creating what we now know as GLaDOS, the sentient AI. You might be wondering if they tried the same with Cave Johnson, but we're going to get back to that later on. Anyway, after gradually making your way up, you now reach the elevator, which can take you back to modern Aperture, and guided with a plan to overload Wheatley's machine with a linguistic paradox, which is the equivalent of an infinite loop for computers, I assume. He will break down and GLaDOS can get the throne again. As we get to the top, we see that Wheatley has created a weird combination between cube and a turret? These are called Franken cubes, and that's probably the most accurate name for them.
The Franken turrets were an attempt to show one of the ways Wheatley has been spending his time since he threw the player down into the underground. Using his limited brain, it didn't seem like he could have come up with a lot, so the idea of using objects he'd have access to seemed appropriate. The turret and the cube are the two most iconic Portal objects, and the Franken turret is little more than a crude combination of those two objects. The hermit crab animation when you pick the cubes up began as a necessity, because we really needed to make them act like cubes when you held them. It ended up being so cute that it became a simple job of making the turret widen its eye and shake its little head, to convey to the player that these things were disrupted, and had no idea who or what they were anymore, and also to make the player feel sympathetic towards their plight. We used a combination of in-game physics pushes and canned Maya animation to allow the player freedom to move them wherever they wanted, line up races between them, or even set them up so they would walk, inevitably, to their doom, into a fizzler.
GLaDOS goes ahead with her plan and hits Wheatley with a paradox. Unfortunately, because Wheatley is so far away from being intelligent enough to actually understand what a paradox is, he just says yes and moves on. Now we're stuck in the hands of Wheatley, and we are forced to keep solving his puzzles. Hilariously, Wheatley cannot make good chambers at all. And so inevitably, Wheatley ends up stealing the work of GLaDOS to keep the momentum of the challenges going. But why does he keep testing them? I mean, it's simple. It's revealed that Wheatley needs to test in order to get a scratch from a massive itch he has. Although, he would soon build up a tolerance and grow madder and madder as he can't fulfill this. He starts lashing out at Chell and GLaDOS, and she only entertains this as she winds him up more and more, calling him a moron.
Alright, so that last test was seriously disappointing. Apparently, being civil isn't motivating you, so let's try her way, alright? Fatty, adopted fatty, fatty, no parents. What?
What exactly is wrong with being adopted?
What's wrong with being adopted? Lack of parents.
For the record, you are adopted and that's terrible.
And also, nothing. But some of my best friends actually are orphans.
Also,
but
look at her, you moron. She's not fat.
I am not a moron! Just do the test. Just do the test.
This feud between GLaDOS and Wheatley erupts when he realizes he no longer needs Chell nor GLaDOS, as he has found something to replace them. This is revealed to be the robots from the co-op mode. I told you they'd link, didn't I? And so he tries to kill them both before. And, like in Portal fashion, we portal away and start running towards his lair. And then again, in Portal fashion, after Wheatley trying to convince you to go back while trying to kill you, we end up where he resides. But this time as a plot twist, we are actually adding cores onto Wheatley, not removing them. Apart from that, the boss fight is essentially the same as last time, except he has shields now. We eventually corrupt Wheatley and try to start a core transfer between GLaDOS and Wheatley, but he booby-trapped the stalemate button, leading to Chell shooting a portal into the moon and shooting Wheatley into space. And so as this conclusion draws near, GLaDOS shows a change of heart by saying she now has Carolyn up in her head, but then immediately deleted Carolyn. This could be shown as GLaDOS fully embracing her unsympathetic robotic side and abandoning all humanity. However, she makes probably the more logical decision that makes sense, and just lets you go instead of trying to kill and trap you. I mean, just out of simplicity. On the way out, it looks like GLaDOS is going to kill you, but instead you are greeted to the most emotional part of the whole game. A bunch of turrets sing an opera at you. I'm not kidding. And as soon as that's done, you escape, the end. Or is it? I mean, there seems to be a lot of unanswered questions here. But before I list them off and start getting into theory territory, let's talk about the tonal contrast between Portal 1 and Portal 2 here. The game takes place in a lot more ruin than last time, but has such a unique vibe that no other game has going for it. Think about it. What other games have you seen which looks even a little bit like Portal does? So unique in its world building and its level design that exploring Aperture seems to be so satisfying and gratifying. Just something to know, as I feel it's important to understand why Portal is so memorable. But, like I said, a lot of things are left as a mystery, and this is why I created the video, to solve these questions. So we're going to be tackling the ones I feel is more important, as all questions are answered, but between subtext, attention to detail, and other extended universe lore. These are the questions left unanswered. 1. Was Cave Johnson put inside a machine? 2. Who is leaving all the writing on the wall? 3. Why is Chell important? I believe I have a solid answer to these 3 questions, and most of them are actually answered inside of Portal 2, but through subtlety, with details you could easily miss with the blink of an eye. And as you answer these questions, you find something truly amazing. A truth hidden away this whole time. A secret plot never explicitly revealed to you. You find a family mystery. The answer to this question is found through an Easter egg, during the escape from GLaDOS between you and Wheatley. You are guided onto a conveyor belt with different defective turret parts. One turret stands out among all the machinery.
Thank you. Get mad. Don't make lemonade. Prometheus was punished by the gods for giving the gift of knowledge to man. He was cast into the bowels of the earth and pecked by birds. Thank you.
I feel that this was very purposeful, using Cave Johnson classic quips like, "Don't make lemonade" and "Get mad." We are to pretty much assume that this is Cave Johnson's mind, pushed into the turret. I assume the context was to test that the concept could actually work. So when they did the same to Carolyn, they could make the project even bigger and better, and have her run the facility indefinitely. The only problem now is the existential existence of Cave Johnson. Aperture was first run in the 1950s, and Cave died in 1982, just according to the wiki. The problem is we don't know when Portal 1 and 2 are set, considering that it's all placed indoors, isolated from the outside world. However, I'm going to assume that the earliest is probably around 2000, which dates Cave Johnson anywhere from 20 years to possible thousands. And as such, it raises an important question. Do you keep Cave alive, or do you fizzle him? Just through a tiny little Easter egg, huge existential questions are raised. But this isn't the first time existentialism has been brought up in Portal 2. Portal 2 specifically dabbles hugely into the theme of existential horror. The first example I can think of is when GLaDOS talks to the player about her black box feature.
Do you know the biggest lesson I learned from what you did? I discovered I have a sort of black box quick save feature. In the event of a catastrophic failure, the last 2 minutes of my life are preserved for analysis. I was able, well, forced really, to relive you killing me again and again, forever. You know, if you'd done that to somebody else, they might devote their existence to exacting revenge. Luckily, I'm a bigger person than that. I'm happy to put this all behind us and get back to work. After all, we've got a lot to do, and only 60 more years to do it. More or less. I don't have the actuarial tables in front of me. But the important thing is you're back, with me. And now I'm on to all your little tricks. So there's nothing to stop us from testing for the rest of your life. After that, who knows? I might take up a hobby. Reanimating the dead, maybe.
There's a lot to digest here, but I have to first extend onto the idea of living your death, again and again, for what appears to be an eternity. Imagine living the most painful part of your life in a never-ending loop. It gets more scary the more you think about it. Which is why GLaDOS, in my opinion, is being very ironic, when she talks about not wanting it to exact revenge. She knows that you hate testing, and so she wants to keep you for the rest of your life doing that exact thing. And when you die, she wants to bring you back to life to keep doing it. This is GLaDOS' idea of replicating the pain she went through, while her black box feature was turned on. When you think about it like that, did GLaDOS' actions really deserve such a horrible existence? There's another time this question is raised. When GLaDOS so freely evaporates a companion cube in front of you, and she has this to say.
I think that one was about to say, I love you. They are sentient, of course. We just have a lot of them.
The blatant disregard from GLaDOS shows that she doesn't really view sentient life as a reason for not destroying it. Obviously this falls in lines with her previous actions, but it's interesting that she doesn't ponder the difference between sentient life and her own life. It seems GLaDOS is a grade A narcissist. Although, there's always the possibility GLaDOS was only trying to get under your skin, and there's no sentient life after all. The question is brought up again at the end of the game, specifically when you toss Wheatley out into space. Sure, it could be seen as a way to enact an epic ending, but imagine being tossed out into space while all you can do is float. We don't even know how long Wheatley can last, but I have to think it's going to be a long time. Definitely much longer than humans can live. Wheatley now has to live the rest of his long life in a void of nothingness, thinking about all of his mistakes. He's been reduced to the same fate of GLaDOS, except there's no chance of Wheatley being rescued from such a fate. Who knows? Wheatley might even have the black box feature that would make his time shrouded in space infinite. It's really horrifying stuff. But to answer the question, yeah, Cave Johnson was in fact put into a machine, be that as it will. This is one of the more complicated answers, but involves a comic released alongside the release of Portal 2. This comic is called Lab Rat. This comic explains the neurotoxin, and most of all, it also explains why Chell is the chosen one, and so I'm grouping the two questions here. You can find the Portal 2 comic on the official website, or by going to the extras page on Portal 2. I downloaded the PDF so we can have a read through. I recommend reading the comic first. It's not that long, it's around 27 pages, it's definitely a worthwhile read if you're a fan of the series. It should take you up to 10 minutes depending on your reading speed. Let's go. Labrat describes a shaggy, unwell-looking man with a companion cube strapped to his back. He talks about a lot of things actually. Perception of reality, subjective perspectives, etc. But most important, he talks about observing Chell go through all these test chambers. We can gather from the illustrations that this Ratman is responsible for the writings on the wall. We see Ratman run towards pills, labelled for the end times, as the companion cubes talk to him. It's later revealed that obviously the cube isn't actually speaking. It's instead the fact that Ratman is schizophrenic. Ratman seems very sure that Chell is special and can take down GLaDOS, as when the cube says, she doesn't have a chance, Ratman responds, she has more of a chance than you think. Does Ratman know something about Chell we don't? Ratman comes out from the shadows and finds that GLaDOS has been destroyed and defeated. This is of course mirroring the events of Portal 1. Afterwards, the comic jumps back in time to reveal how GLaDOS came to be when Ratman and another scientist was working on it. It came from the need to bring forth new technology, and science like Cave Johnson always wanted to do. However, when they turn it on, it takes a 16th of a picosecond. Oh, by the way, that's 1/trillionth of a second, which would make this a 16th of a trillionth of a second. Jesus Christ. We jump back to the present and see Ratman watching the robot pull Chell back inside of the facility. As we jump back to the past again to see Ratman and the scientist create the cars, we see them trying to make a conscience car. Ratman exclaims that it won't work, as you can always just ignore your conscience. Ratman, realizing that Chell is in extreme danger again, goes back into the facility to rescue her. He finds her in a long-term relaxation, and this is obviously where the beginning of Portal 2 takes place. And while he tries to wake her up, a turret shoots him down, seriously injuring him on the floor, near death. Back to the past again, and we see GLaDOS trying to hunt down Ratman with a neurotoxin, after killing everyone else in Aperture. Ratman manages to escape, however, and this is the origin story of how Ratman came to be crawling behind the walls. He realizes that GLaDOS is going to try and get new test subjects. So what does he do? He pushes Chell's name up to the top of that list. When the cube asks Ratman why he chose Chell, he responds, just a hunch. He manages to crawl to the computer and reset the fuses to restart her life support, so that she will invariably wake up again back at some point. After doing this, Ratman dies over the bed and the comic ends. So that answers the question as to who's writing on the wall. But we have one question left, and this question is the key to the puzzle. Admittingly, to answer this question is going to require a lot of speculation, but I think I have the answer, and it's one of the biggest mysteries hidden inside of Portal 2. When Ratman was changing the list, why was Chell's last name redacted? Who is Chell? She could never tell us, I mean she's completely mute. But fortunately there are enough clues hidden throughout the game for us to draw a pretty good conclusion. Remember when I said it's important to remember that Chell's adopted? Well, it's going to become very clear why in a second. Let's review the first clue, which left a lot of original players kinda gobsmacked on their first playthrough.
Bring your daughter to work day. That did not end well. And 40 potato batteries. Embarrassing. I mean, I realise they're children, but still, low-hanging fruit and all that. Barely science, really, is it? Baking soda volcano. Well, at least it's not a potato battery, I'll give it that, but it's not terrifically original, is it? You know what I mean? Not exactly primary research, even within the child sciences. I'm guessing this wasn't one of the scientists' children. I don't want to be snobby, but let's be honest, it's got manual labourer written all over it, hasn't it? I'm not saying they're not as good as the professionals, they're just a lot dumber. Look at that, it's growing right up into the ceiling. The whole place is probably overrun with potatoes at this point, isn't it? At least you won't starve, though.
By Chell. Hold up. Yeah, you saw that correctly. Either there's someone out there called Chell who has a guardian working at Aperture, or that's our main protagonist right there. If we work off the assumption that this is indeed the Chell we know, we can draw a conclusion that at one point someone who worked at Aperture was looking after Chell. But to be fair, this could be either her adoptive parents or her real parents. Now I can't fully speculate exactly who Chell belonged to, but in my opinion there is a possibility here. But it's reported that, although this theory is kind of like well acknowledged in the Portal universe and pretty much considered to be canon, it's still speculation. And given the information, we are technically required to make some leaps in logic in order to come to this conclusion. But as I see it, this is how it is. Chell is the daughter of Caroline and Cave Johnson. Let's review the evidence for a moment. I mean, considering it's all circumstantial, I'm going to list them all off. At one point in the game, you can find a picture of Caroline and Cave Johnson together. And if you compare both Chell and Caroline, they look very similar. It's possible the artists were tasked with creating likely portraits of Chell's parents. Now this would give us the idea that Chell was their birth child, not their adopted child. So that's something to remember. Another fact is that Chell had to be the child of someone working in Aperture for her to even show up at the Bring Your Daughter to Work day. So it makes sense that this is how Chell ended up making the project. Another piece of evidence is the fact that Chell's last name is redacted from the list. Maybe this was GLaDOS wanting to hide away the fact that Chell was her daughter. Or maybe she was on a waiting list while Caroline was still in charge. It would also make sense that GLaDOS would let Chell go in the end. She only just remembered that she used to be Caroline at one point, which would lead her to remembering a child. This is why she would let her go, even with the perfect chance to kill her with 3 turrets. Maybe it's not as logical as we think. Also, it's possible that this was known gossip inside of the Aperture Science facility, as the fact that Chell came into that Daughter to Work day, employees there would know that this is the case. And so, maybe that was the hunch that Ratman was relying on. But let's for a second talk about why I personally believe Chell was in Aperture in the first place. It's very possible that she was trying to hunt down the origins of her birth parents, and her research led her to Aperture Science. Finding this out, she puts her name down on the testing list, in hopes that she can meet her parents. If this is the case, then the timeline for Portal lines up perfectly. Everything suddenly makes sense. Now like I said, this is a pretty accepted theory in the Portal community, and obviously without saying, I think this is all intentional by Valve, for those willing to dig deep enough. It also gives us all the clues we need to form a coherent timeline out of the situation. And so before we end this video, let's run through the story of Aperture Science, in a nutshell, one last time, with all of our newfound evidences put together. Aperture Science was created in the 60s by an entrepreneur named Cave Johnson and his assistant Caroline. The mission statement of Aperture was to find big new scientific discoveries, regardless of the danger in it. During the time, Cave Johnson and Caroline had a child, which was known to be Chell. After a successful run for Cave, his luck finally caught up to him and he was dying. Chell was sent away to adoptive parents and, asking the company he once ran to put him and Caroline inside of a computer. Cave Johnson's soul was put into a computer, but it was a turret. And as for Caroline, she probably didn't want this to happen to her, but due to the instructions, she was forced into a sentient AI, which, as we know, killed everyone in the facility. Ratman ended up escaping the neurotoxin and decided he needed to take her down. After finding Chell in a list of potential testers, he bumps her way up to the top, leaving Chell to walk into the facility and start testing, in hopes that she can find her birth parents. This is the beginning of Portal 1. After reading the warning signs from Ratman, which he left, she was ready to portal away after GLaDOS tried to burn her. She runs towards GLaDOS and eventually incinerates the core off of her, destroying the facility and her with it. She doesn't escape, however, as she is dragged straight back into a long-term relaxation vault. Ratman, seeing this, decides he can't leave and needs to help her escape again. He crawls back inside, and while trying to reset her life support, gets shot by turrets in the process. He dies, awaiting Chell to wake back up. Wheatley finds Chell, and they both try and escape the facility. But after Wheatley being Wheatley, GLaDOS awakens, causing the same situation as last time to occur. This time though, Wheatley helps you escape GLaDOS and take her down once again, and you transfer Wheatley's car into GLaDOS. But he becomes very power hungry. His power hunger turns GLaDOS into potatoes, and you must now fall down into a pit and climb your way back up with GLaDOS in order to take back the throne. This happens, but along the way GLaDOS learns that she used to be Caroline, and learns her true origin. As you get to the top, you notice Wheatley needs to test, otherwise he gets a really terrible itch. But after building up a tolerance, he finds another solution, killing you and using GLaDOS's robot she built to test with instead. Before this can all happen though, you manage to escape his death trap, march all the way down to Wheatley, hang corrupted cores onto him, transfer GLaDOS back into the body, and toss him into space. This leaves GLaDOS. She now knows that she doesn't need anyone to test, and potentially finding out that you are her child, decides to let you leave. And that's Portal. I think what makes Portal so special to me is the fact that most of this story was told off screen, through different Easter eggs and the level design. A lot of what happens in Portal is shown to you, not told, and that just makes it 10 times more brilliant. When you play through these games, you feel like you're discovering a hidden mystery no one has discovered before, even if that's not necessarily true. And paired with the incredible gameplay and the incredible characters, yeah, this makes it one of my favourite video games of all time, and possibly one of my favourite things ever made. This is why this video took so long, and why this script took me so long to make. It's because I knew that if I was going to cover the story of Portal, I would have to make it epic, and I would have to make it count. I didn't see a video covering Portal in this much depth. And I knew I just had to. Sadly, Valve has now moved on from making great video games. Sure, they still make the odd card game and run Dota, I guess, but they're most focused on Steam and VR. Their days of making video games is probably long past. And as much as it pains me to say it, it's probably unlikely that we'll see another game quite like Portal in a very long time. As sad as it makes me, I love how we can still go back to the amazing adventures they pathed out and discover one of the greatest gaming mysteries of all time, a family mystery. Thank you, Valve, for giving me the opportunity to make this video, and thank you, Portal, for existing. Thank you for watching this video. It took a long time to make it, as you could probably see, but I just had to do it justice. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like and subscribe. Before I missed anything out or just want to discuss Portal more, as you probably should, just leave a comment in the comment section and let's have a discussion. Just because Portal is 8 years old, that doesn't mean we should stop discussing it. So let's make Portal 2 discussion active again. I have another video essay on my channel about Brockhampton if you're interested. Although I have only just started making videos like this, so a subscribe would, again, let me know that this is something you want to see me keep on making. Finally, I have an EP out for my rap alias, if you like music and that interests you at all. It's playing in the background right now, and you can find it in the description. Thank you for getting this far, and I'll see you all later in the next video.
That's the truth. I don't like it, but it's the way it is. Jackson.